Hey Creepypasta fans, it's Kira with the Dark Cosmos. Enjoy tonight's sci-fi horror story, and remember, stay cosmic.
Woohoo! We made it!
Oliver exclaimed as soon as our spaceship landed on the surface of Mars, but I wasn't so sure about it.
Looks like it,
I mumbled.
but let's double check all our systems. Something doesn't feel right.
Are you kidding?
My co-pilot laughed at me.
We're on Mars, Natalie. We succeeded like nobody else has. Let's go out there.
He sounded delighted. His laughter wasn't mean-spirited. He was just teasing me, but I couldn't find it in myself to celebrate just yet.
It can't be this easy.
I whispered under my breath. We didn't have a single inconvenience or unexpected issue in our entire journey. Even the landing was as smooth as possible. But my mind was plagued by nightmares. Horrible scenarios danced behind my eyelids, and I felt them even more real than if I had been sleeping. The thing is, I knew I wanted to be an astronaut since I was a kid. And as I grew up, I became more aware of the extensive requirements and challenges I would have to face. But it was only in recent years, the last of my training preparing me for this mission to Mars, that my colleagues really shared with me the dangers waiting for me in space. It was part of the preparation process. I needed to know all of the possible threats, so I could learn ways on how to deal with them. This meant I had to sit through detailed stories about how everyone before me failed on this exact mission. Asteroids I couldn't dodge, fires they couldn't put out, malfunctions in the system or the spacesuits, lack of oxygen or fuel, and, on one rare occasion, an extended period of time locked in with bad company in a small space resulted in two pilots fighting each other to death. Mostly, we only received the last few seconds of audio, or a satellite's photograph of the moment something exploded on the red planet. The fact that we only received crumbs as news on the life or death of our colleagues was demoralizing at best, traumatizing at worst. Except for that unusual care. On the last message from that mission that reached Earth, there was a bone-chilling recording of the audio of their fight. One of the astronauts screaming with utter desperation, "He bit my ear! He bit my fucking ear! He's going to kill me! He's lost his fucking mind!" That recording was never made public, and it was so disturbing it was kept as a secret to most people at NASA, and only used as a warning to the people that were nearing their first mission to Mars. I never recovered from it. I could hear those shattered screams in the back of my head, even as my dear friend and reasonable partner hugged me. He was elated as he led me down and out of the spaceship. He held my hand as we took our first steps on Mars's surface, but my soul was incapable of finding solace. I didn't feel an ounce of calm. I only attempted to act confident and excited for his sake, but Oliver saw right through me.
What? Are you scared?
He laughed. I scoffed in response. His kind eyes let me know he genuinely cared about me, and he wanted me to enjoy this as much as he was. Teasing me like this wasn't exactly a bad strategy.
I'm not scared.
I smirked. It was my first sincere smile since we left the planet Earth.
Alright, then let's go exploring. Let's go!
Oliver suggested with a grin. We went through all the necessary protocols for first arriving on Mars, and then we granted ourselves some free time to explore Mars's surface with our own eyes. It was a breathtaking sight. Since all of the missions to Mars started failing, it seemed that we knew less and less about our neighboring planet. At least, we knew enough to build a vehicle capable of driving two pilots around on the surface of the planet. Oliver and I got out of the ship, and then we were on our way. I dreamed of this my entire life, and it felt like magic. I constantly looked over my shoulder and restlessly checked the controls of the small vehicle, but I was starting to relax. That was when Oliver said to me in an uneasy tone,
Natalie? Does the Mars rover still work?
No, it doesn't.
I shook my head. Every person we sent to this planet died, and every machine exploded.
Then why is it coming towards us?
I looked over in the direction Oliver was pointing to, but by the time I looked, the little thing was actually turning around and moving at full speed away from us.
Oh my god.
I whispered.
That can't be right. We have to go find it, right?
I hadn't even finished the sentence when Oliver turned our vehicle around and drove us as fast as he could in the same direction as the ghost of the rover. Our vehicle couldn't go that fast, but we were certainly a little faster than the small robot. At first, we discussed amongst ourselves possible explanations for the resurrection of the rover, but as we got closer to it, I grew quiet. That feeling of anxiety came over me again. We weren't safe. Just because we had landed didn't mean we could return to Earth, couldn't we? As we rounded a small hill, we came across the first site of disaster. The remnants of one ship that came before us. Oliver pulled the brakes so harshly I nearly fell off the vehicle. We gasped at the same time. It was one thing knowing that some ships broke down the second they landed on Mars. It was something very different seeing the catastrophe with our own eyes. That huge carcass in the middle of a lifeless desert felt like coming across a full skeleton of a fossilized dinosaur. In fact, we were entering the graveyard of failed missions to Mars. When we recovered from the shock, we kept driving, much slower now, but the surprises kept coming. After driving past that broken ship, we were able to see another one, not too far away, and another, for as far as we could see. We moved forward, but then there was the first sound.
What was that?
I wondered.
Something could have fallen down from those ruins.
Oliver tried to soothe me, but his expression betrayed him. He was as unsettled as me. A few meters later, a similar sound came from the opposite direction. Both our heads snapped towards it, and our eyes desperately searched for an explanation.
What the hell?
Do you think it's the rover?
Oliver asked me.
I think we should leave.
I replied.
Yeah, no shit.
Oliver agreed, but made no move to drive us away. The two of us looked around, jaws dropped, at the place we found ourselves in. We felt insignificant, surrounded by the ruins of older spaceships. We weren't lost, but it might not be so easy to return to our own ship. We were still assessing the situation when I realized something important. These were remnants of ships that broke down on Mars, but they were mostly in good conditions, except for the fact that they had pieces missing. Entire parts of the hull were pulled off the ships in a way that was so obviously not natural. I opened my mouth to say something about it to Oliver, but then we heard a new sound, louder, steady, and coming directly at us. We saw him in time, but the shock and fear paralyzed us. We could have done something. Damn, we should have done something. We could have dodged the attack. We could have tried to run. We could have attempted to fight back, but we didn't. We stood there with wide eyes, parted lips, and shaking hands as a strange man ran full speed towards us. He jumped at the vehicle and tackled us to the ground. We were still frozen. It was like time stopped. We were suspended for an eternity, experiencing the dull ache of the fall and hearing the ragged breathing and animal groans from the man on top of us. Then, as quickly as it happened, the spell broke, and all hell broke loose.
Let me go!
Oliver yelled. But when he tried to stand up, the man on top of us slammed him right back down to the ground in a way that was clearly harder than before. The two of us thrashed around, and I'm sure I managed to kick the beast on top of us, but it didn't last long. New pairs of arms fell on us and dragged us away from the creature. I hesitated to call him a man. My eyes recognized a human body, but nothing else fit. He wore protective goggles over his eyes and an oxygen mask over his mouth and nose, but the rest of his head was unprotected. His screen had a sickly green tint and darkened veins protruding all over it. He didn't pronounce a word the entire time. He only groaned loudly and fumed at the mouth. Oliver and I struggled with all of our strength, but there were at least two people dragging each of us away. My heart was beating faster than ever before. All of my fears were justified, but this was worse than all of my nightmares. This was unexplainable, and the confusion only scared me more. My partner and I exchanged looks of worry, and eventually, we stopped struggling so hard, realizing we were only making things worse. The unseen attackers dragged us through a maze of broken-down ships, while the green-faced man chased behind us with a grimace permanently etched onto his features. Finally, they dropped us down heavily on the ground. The fall took my breath away, but Oliver recovered faster and made a move to stand back up, but he froze up again. My eyes trailed upwards and immediately found the reason for his sudden terror. At our sides were standing two more greenish monsters, with the same goggles, masks, torn clothes, and messed up skin. But these two were holding some kind of handmade axes. Terrible things that were probably pulled from the pieces of the ships. The sharp edges were much bigger than their heads, and they looked beyond deadly. For a moment, there was a deep silence, and I was overcome by the hope that maybe this was all a bad dream. But then, I heard a loud static through the comms in my suit, followed by a loud click. We were connected to a new signal. Immediately, there came a voice addressing us.
Welcome home.
A new man said as he slowly walked towards us. He had a small limp, and he wore a ragged but functional spacesuit.
I know it's a shock at first, but trust me, you will fit right in. What is this?
Oliver exclaimed. He sounded equally enraged and terrified. The man finally stood in front of us and smiled. He was vaguely familiar, but he looked so worn down he was barely recognizable. Though I quickly guessed that if all of these men had made it to Mars, then I must have studied them at one point or another.
Home. I told you.
The old man smiled.
You see, you weren't sent to Mars in a brave and glorious mission. You were kicked out of Earth, like all of us.
That's bullshit.
I interrupted him, but I was thoroughly ignored.
These were suicide missions, but nobody cared about us. Everyone that tried to come here died, until one of us decided it was enough. He survived, barely, but he cut off communications with the Earth. Then, one by one, we all followed in his footsteps and made a home for ourselves here. We prepared this home for you.
Then Oliver asked a question that I believed unimportant at first.
Who was that first one?
The leader of these people took his time to answer, and every second of silence that passed made me feel like I was getting choked. Finally, his grin turned devilish as he replied.
I believe he was your welcoming party.
My eyes snapped to the side, looking for the sick man with the green skin and lost humanity, but he was nowhere to be seen.
You're mad.
I whispered, right before jumping to my feet and screaming at him.
This is insane! Let us go!
From the corner of my eye, I saw the men with the axes take a step towards me and raise their arms, but their leader clicked his tongue and they stood still.
You are exaggerating.
The man told me with a deep calm that infuriated me even more.
It's in everyone's best interest that you start getting used to your new home. As you can probably guess, we can't afford to let you go back to Earth and share our little secret. And your attitude will determine what kind of life you'll get to lead here. So, act accordingly, choose wisely, and you won't regret it. Now, my partner will give you a small tour of our home. Enjoy yourselves.
He started walking away, and Oliver must have noticed that now my entire body was shaking. I couldn't move on from the shock of these completely crazy circumstances, but I couldn't ignore the feelings of rage, disgust, and immense fear for our lives. Oliver put a reassuring hand on my shoulder, and it helped. But a second later, we were facing 3 new men. All of them wore safe suits, but none of them looked quite content or healthy. 2 of them were guards. They took Oliver and I by our arms and started leading us away. The 3rd man walked between us in silence. When we were far away enough from the others, there was again a static coming through our comms, followed by a new click, the voice of the stranger coming through the secure line.
They're going to take as many resources as they can from your ship. Then they will blow it up to send their message to Earth. If we want to live, we have to be quick. Understood?
This man was plotting an escape with us, but first he had a lot to explain. His voice was familiar though, and I just had to take one look at the side of his face to realize his identity, and that of his partner, and the leader of this place. He was missing half of his right ear.